Once again, I'm very happy to be with each of you here this evening, especially as we think of those that are suffering, those that are going through difficult times, and we may remember them, not only when we're here, but also when we go home, to remember some of them in our prayers, and also to, if possible, visit somebody as well. It's really important to have some visitations as well. You know, last week we were talking a little bit about Elijah. We learned a little bit about his life. We learned a little bit about his work. He was considered an ordinary man, but through trusting God, he became very extraordinary. And sometimes, you know, we're ordinary people in our lives, and yet God wants to use ordinary people. And if you trust in him, you can become extraordinary. What we remember about Elijah was that his was a voice of stern rebuke that he gave to Israel. Now, in order to prepare for the work, he needed time to pray. And we're here at prayer meeting, and we often think of others that we need to pray for, but we also realize that Elijah had to pray for himself. Remember, we read that he was a man of like passions as we are. 3.5 years praying in solitude, and probably a good deal of that time praying for himself. When we talk about rebuke, we often think about doing something publicly. Sometimes I talk to different people. They stand up in church, they make a point, and they feel that they have done a rebuke to somebody. Sometimes we find also that as we mentioned last time, sometimes people send an email out. And not even to the individual involved. They send an email to the ministry. And they say, what are you doing about this? And this evening, I'd like us to talk just a few minutes here about the work that we are to do for those who are erring. What is that work of rebuke? We think about Jesus, and why is it that we need to pray for ourselves when we are talking about giving someone rebuke? You see somebody doing something wrong, something that needs to be rebuked. Why do we need to pray for ourselves? What do you think? What is the biggest reason we need to be praying for ourselves? We may be in that situation tomorrow. That's true. And we kind of talked about that last time a little bit. But there is something else. It's interesting how Jesus puts it in Matthew chapter 7. It says, "And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye?" Now that's pretty strong, isn't it? You know, we're busy looking at somebody's what? No, little bitty thing, and what do you have? And you have something bigger in your own eye. Or how wilt thou say to thy brother, let me pull out the mote out of thine eye, and behold, the beam is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye. So what do we need to be praying for before we even begin? When we see something is wrong, what do we need to be praying for? For ourselves, to make sure what? Yeah, to see ourselves as we really are, because we don't see ourselves as we really are. We see ourselves as quite better than we are. And so in reality, we need to be praying for ourselves to see ourselves as we are. Unfortunately, you know, in Matter of Blessings, as it comments on this, something is interesting here. It's not always the case, but many times it says, "He who is guilty of wrong is the first to suspect wrong." I don't know if you've noticed that over the years. Somebody who is a schemer, someone who is trying to get the best deal and steal from you, in essence, to try to get the best deal, what do? They're the ones doing exactly that. The one who is guilty of wrong is the first to suspect wrong. By condemning another, he is trying to conceal or excuse the evil of his own heart. Now that's the worst thing, is when they are doing it purposely. Sometimes we may not be doing it purposely, but at the same time, we don't see ourselves as we really should. And so our prayer really needs to be, as we're praying for those whom we see are in the wrong, that we see ourselves before we even go to that person. To be prepared at least, because, other people see us more than we see ourselves. And so if you go to somebody and you tell them, excuse me, brother, or excuse me, sister, this is a problem, they say, yeah, but look at you. But what if you've already taken care of that with God? Wouldn't it be much better to have taken care of it first? It was through sin that man gained the knowledge of evil. No sooner had the first pair sinned than they began to do what? To accuse each other. And this is what human nature will inevitably do when uncontrolled by the grace of Christ. And so it's natural when somebody is being condemned. What do? The first thing they do is to condemn someone else. It's not my fault. It is somebody else's. So the question is, how do we actually go and deal with wrongs within the church? What is the process that we need to go through? Again, in Matter Blessings. But the difficulty lies with the individual members of the church. And it is here that the cure must be wrought. Jesus bids the accuser first cast the beam out of his own eye. In other words, what? Renounce his what? Sensorous spirit. Confess and forsake his own sin before trying to correct others. We find here is having to do with attitude. So in reality, when we're looking at this statement here, you find that there are those who have a mote in their eye, and there are those who have what? A beam. And in this case, what actually is the beam? What is the beam that is in the eye? A sensorous spirit. Okay, it means that we're talking about attitude. How we speak to somebody else actually can be considered a beam. So which one is worse? Which one is worse? The beam. So the sensorous spirit, which we don't look at, we don't condemn that as much. Sometimes I find people, they say, oh, you just have to understand, this is how I am. Well, yeah, that's how you are, but you need to change how you are. It's not enough to be like that. It needs to be changed. And so we need to be looking at our attitude. And we don't do that often enough. We look at this is right, this is wrong. We look at our life. We don't see much wrong there many times. And it is attitude that is important. I was wondering, as I was looking at this material here, I was wondering how much time did Elijah spend during that 3.5 years praying for his attitude? I mean, it's quite simple. I mean, he was right. He knew what he was doing. He knew what he needed to talk about. But if he did it in the wrong spirit, that would have been completely undo everything that he was trying to do. Oh, we don't know if he did or didn't. So, well, during the 3.5 years, no, he didn't. It's interesting. How do you get rid of a sensorous spirit? What is the way when we're dealing with people? What do we actually need to come to the point of being prepared to do? It's interesting here, Matter Blessings. Not until you feel that you can sacrifice your own self-dignity and even lay down your life in order to save an erring brother, have you cast the beam out of your own eye so that you are prepared to help your brother. This is quite a strong point here. When I am seeing something wrong in someone, and this is the problem with Facebook, social media, in various ways. It has become very impersonal. And so you may look on there and you may see something wrong. You condemn that which is wrong, and you want to condemn it via Facebook. And yet that's not what it says here. before we condemn, what do we need to do? We need to pray. Pray for what? Humility, yes. So what specifically do we need to have here? What specific attitude? Notice here, we must pray that the beam is removed from our eye. And what is the beam? Am I prepared to do what? To die for this person. Until then, I am not ready to speak to them. We talk about going to speak to somebody. Yes, we understand that. But when we're saying going to speak to this person, what are we talking about? Attitude is critical in this whole issue. What is my attitude? So when something is wrong, am I ready to die and give up my life for this person? And many times we're not ready to do that. So what happens? People then go from being conservative to become liberal. Yeah, that's what happens. Why? Because the problem with conservatism and liberalism is exactly the same. Neither one is willing to die for the brother. Well, neither one is. Liberal simply excuses the sin and says it's not my problem and lets it go. Conservative condemns the sin, but if they really started to analyze it, they're not willing to die for them either. And that's why I've been in churches. I've been in some churches where I remember they were so conservative, very ultra-conservative. And then you go there a few years later and they're ultra-liberal. Why is that? It's because of this. This is the root. And when we're talking about the work of Elijah, we have to combine it with attitude. It is not just there on top of the mountain. It's not just there. Yeah, we can stand up on the mountain and choose you this day whom you're going to serve. If God be God, if Baal, then serve him and all that type of stuff. But because of that, in order to get himself back on track, he needed to actually fast for 40 days. Was it 40 days that he was running? Why? Because attitude is so important. And in order to finish his work, he had to go up there to Mount Horeb. He had to look at the wind and the rain and the fire and all that type of stuff. And he had to come to the point that it's the still small voice that God is working with. And God is working in trying to redeem people. It is not by being, people say, well, I'm firm. Well, you're not firm when you have the wrong attitude. Avoid anything in look or gesture, word or tone that savors of pride or self-sufficiency. Guard yourself against a word or look that would exalt yourself or place your goodness and righteousness in contrast with their failings. This is quite a serious thing here. Now make sure you're not comparing yourselves among yourselves. Beware of the most distant approach to disdain, overbearing, or contempt. With care, avoid every appearance of anger. And though you use plainness of speech, let there be no reproach, no railing accusation, no token of warmth, but that of earnest love. Yeah, we need to be plain about it. Yes, it's not talking about beating around the bush. It's not talking about... I've even had people that say, oh, yes, we talked about it. And then when I hear what they actually said, they beat around the bush so badly that person never knew what they were talking about. No, we need to be plain, but we need to make sure that our attitude is right. Because if not, we can actually seal that soul for life. That's it. Above all, let there be no shadow of hate or ill will, no bitterness or sourness of expression. Nothing but kindness and gentleness can flow from a heart of love. What are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to punish? I've been in meetings where the goal is to punish someone. Not to redeem, but to punish. What is our goal? Yet all these precious fruits need not hinder you, notice this part, need not hinder you from speaking in the most serious, solemn manner, as though angels were directing their eyes upon you, and you were acting in reference to the coming judgment. We're not talking about not addressing issues. Some people tell me, oh, we got to talk with love, and they don't say anything. No, we need to say things, but we need to make sure it's the right attitude. Bear in mind that the success of reproof depends greatly upon the spirit in which it is given. And what are we trying to accomplish? This is the question. What is our purpose? If our purpose is to punish, then that's the wrong purpose. Disciplines. Goal of discipline is not to punish. The goal of discipline is to do what? To change the person, or restore, yes. So to change the way the person's acting. It's not, the goal is not punishment. Do not neglect earnest prayer, that you may possess a lowly mind, and that angels of God may go before you to work upon the hearts you are trying to reach, and so soften them by heavenly impressions, that your efforts may avail. If any good is accomplished, take no credit to yourself. God alone should be exalted. God alone has done it all. And how many times? That's another thing we need to pray for, because we like to pat ourselves on the back so much. You know, I hear so many times people say, you know, we need to develop more to encourage people, talk to them how good they are and everything else. You know, people don't need that so much. They get that already by themselves, even thinking about it. I remember John Bunyan, once he was at the pulpit and somebody told him afterwards, Brother Bunyan, that was the best sermon that I've ever heard in my life. And he says, you don't need to tell me that. He says, the devil whispered it to me long before I left the pulpit. The devil does that work already. What we do need is earnest prayer, that we may have the right attitude, that we can work with the people. This is why probably Elijah was unprepared to meet the king earlier. You know, Elijah was a very, the character, you can see the Elijah character there. And he needed 3.5 years to prepare to go spend, not only with him, but what about with the people? What about at Mount Carmel? So it's not just waiting for the people to be ready, but sometimes also for himself. Obviously, in Malachi 4, verse 5, it says that we do need Elijah today. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. We need Elijahs today. But it's not just, so many times I find people, they want to be on that mountaintop giving reproof. They want to be able to go to the king and tell him all what evils he's doing. But when you look at the work of Elijah, the time that he spent with those to give that reproof actually was quite minimal. He spent most of his time establishing training schools. That's where he spent a lot of his work. Training Elisha to continue the work that he had behind him. And in reproof, when he did go, he probably had to spend a bit of time to make sure that he is right with him. Keep in mind that this Elijah that we're talking about was a man subject to like passions as we are, and he prayed earnestly. And it's interesting here, the connection there. He prayed earnestly, and we often think it's for who? For the people. Okay, that he's about to reprove. But before saying he prayed earnestly, it says what? He was subject to? Same problems we have. That means that the prayer probably had to be a little bit more for himself. And when he did that, that's how he got prepared to go to heaven. That's how he got ready for it. And we are getting ready for that too. In volume 3, it says, those who are to prepare the way for the second coming of Christ are represented by faithful Elijah, as John came in the spirit of Elijah to prepare the way for Christ's first advent. So we find here that we are to prepare the way for the second coming of Christ in the same way that Elijah or John the Baptist did. And in the case of Elijah, he got translated straight from this earth to heaven. And we can have that same experience if we have the same character. So I want to talk a little bit about Matthew 18. Matthew 18 is really an important principle here. It says, moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. Again, before you take this first step, what do you need to do? Make sure what? The beam is taken out of your own eye. That's the first thing we need to look at. And then what are we trying to accomplish? But if he will not hear thee, take with thee one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. What? To make sure that the person is recognized that they've been doing evil, or that you're taking 1 or 2 with you, that you're trying to do what? Trying to restore that individual. Now keep in mind that when we're talking here about overtaken in a fault, in Review and Herald it says, brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. Somebody mentioned that a few minutes ago. Here is a special direction to deal tenderly with those overtaken in a fault. So when somebody is in a fault, remember that you may be in the same thing. But it goes on. This overtaken must have its full significance. It is something different from deliberate sin. Overtaken in a fault is not something that is premeditated. It says here, it is something different from deliberate sin. To be led into sin unawares, not meaning to sin, but sinning through want of watchfulness and prayer, and not discerning the temptation of Satan, and so falling into his snare. There is a difference to be made in the case of one who plans and deliberately enters into temptation and marks out an evil course, covering his sins skillfully that he should not be detected. Now, this is a whole different case. Sometimes we're talking to a person and, they deny until you finally show the evidence is, oh, I forgot about that. And you can see it's been deliberate. It's been hiding. And then you say, what about this other point? Oh, no, definitely not on that point. Until you find another evidence. Oh, yeah, I didn't realize that. Yeah, those are different things. So when we're talking about overtaking the fault, it goes on here. The treatment cannot be the same in both cases. More effective measures are needed to check the premeditated sin, but the apostle directs the treatment to be given to those who are overtaken or surprised or overcome by temptation. Ye which are spiritual, you who have evidence that you have a connection with God, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness. Not crush all hope and courage out of the soul, but restore him in meekness, considering thyself lest thou also be tempted. Faithful reproofs will be needed, and kindly counsel and supplication to God to bring him to see his danger and his sin. Now, when we're talking about the steps, you see, the original means to set in joint as a dislocated bone. That is, to restore someone means it's like to put the dislocated bone back in place. Therefore, effort should be made to set him in joint and bring him to himself by convincing him of his sin and error, that he shall not be separated from the true vine, or like a limb cut off. He is to be loved because Christ loved us in our errors and in our weakness. There should be no triumphing in a brother's fall, but in meekness and the fear of God, in love for his soul's sake, seek to save him from sin. That's what we're here for. We are to seek and to save that which is lost. After speaking about the work of Elijah, we go back here in James. Brethren, if any of you do err from the truth, and one convert him, let him know that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his ways shall save a soul from death, and shall hide a multitude of sins. Are we to hide sins? Yeah. It means that we're not trying to publicize this. You see, if you work with a person, if you go meet with them personally, and they recognize what they're doing is wrong, and they change, no one else needs to know about it. What happens if it didn't work? What do you do then? You bring what? If you've done all you can. This obviously is not meaning, someone came to me one time and they said, we need to have a church business meeting, we need to put this person on discipline. Well, did you go talk to them? Yes, I did. When? On Monday. And by Sunday, they want to have a church business meeting already. You know, this is why on Thursday we went back again, 2 of us, and now we're having we need to have a board meeting so Sunday we can deal with this issue. Like, you got to be joking. You're not taking time to work with that person. Now, it's true, in Timothy, there are some things that have to be done immediately. There's no time. If somebody murdered someone, you don't need to take time for them to murder again before you address the issues. So there are some things that need to be dealt with immediately. But we're talking here about persons who are overtaken in a fault. Yes?
I was wondering about that, hiding a multitude of sins. I always thought that was hiding our own sins.
But also hiding others, because when you are working with them, what happens? If they recognize something, there's a lot of things that will never come out. If a person does not change, what happens? Eventually things become public. And not only that one, because sometimes we see people going, when they go down the wrong track, what happens? They just don't go down the wrong track on one point. A whole bunch of things start coming out of the heart that we never knew were in the heart. Even the case with Peter, when Peter denied Christ, that was never supposed to be public. Those were things that Peter himself did not know about. But the Lord allowed it in order to try to reach out to him as well. Because we're trying to avoid a lot of things becoming public to the whole world. So the purpose of Reformation is not to purify the church by separating the offender from the church. That's not the point. Although that may happen at times. The purpose of the offender of Reformation is to do what? To convert the offender, and thus what? Hide a multitude of sins. So in closing, I'd like to read James 5:19 and 20 one more time. Brethren, if any of you do err from the truth, and one convert him, let him know that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death, and shall hide a multitude of sins. May the Lord help us that we may all truly surrender our heart to the Lord, and in this work of saving souls, that we may really work to save them, not just from the sin, but even their reputation and everything else that goes along with it. May the Lord help us that we may be ready for eternity. Amen.